Watching a loved one, a family member, or friend struggle with active alcoholism or addiction can be heartbreaking. The disease of addiction often brings disappointment, sadness, and destroyed relationships. Meet Lisa as she talks from an outside perspective, not as someone who suffered from addiction herself, but as someone who watched a very close friend endure and ultimately recover from alcoholism. Today, she's going to share her story of how she supported her friend through that recovery process. Welcome to the Sober Living Stories podcast. This podcast is dedicated to sharing stories of sobriety. We shine a spotlight on individuals who have faced the challenges of alcoholism and addiction and are today living out their best lives sober. Each guest has experienced incredible transformation and are here to share their story with you. I'm Jessica Stepanovic, your host. Join me each week as guests from all walks of life share their stories to inspire and provide hope to those who need it most. Welcome to another episode of the Sober Living Stories podcast. Meet Lisa Dare. She's going to share her powerful experience with a close friend's journey through alcoholism and recovery. Listen in to understand what it's like to witness someone battle addiction and how it affects their loved ones. Lisa is going to also offer valuable insight on how you can support others through the recovery and what you can watch out for. With both her personal and professional insights as a coach, Lisa is versed in helping others become the best version of themselves and reach their full potential. Hi, and welcome to the show, Lisa.
Hello, Jessica.
It's great to have you on. I love giving listeners an outside perspective on what it looks like to witness someone go through addiction and then come out of it. And so I'm really interested in hearing your insight. If you want to just kind of start from whatever point you'd like to and bring us through to the present day.
Yes, I'd be happy to do that. I have a very close friend, and it was actually somebody that I met through work. So we've been friends now for over 20 years, so it's hard to believe. And I think, what struck me when I saw the topic of your podcast, Jessica, was, yes, I think, often we think about the impact on the individual, but as you said, there's a lot of impacts just in many different ways. And I think having been through this experience with my friend of her battling alcoholism, I learned so much about it because I think as an everyday person, you sort of hear about it, you know about AA, but you don't know a lot about it until you truly experience it. And it's interesting because my original background was as a healthcare professional. So I also saw it from that lens as well, people who were being treated for acute episodes of alcohol poisoning and things like that. But what happened for me with my friend was what I discovered, Jessica, and I know it's been documented, is that she was somebody who hid it really well. And I can remember the episode that sort of became, I guess, the tipping point to me sort of discovering that maybe something was really wrong. And this happened to be at a work function. I was in the pharmaceutical industry. It happened to be a function where we were hosting an educational event with some physicians. And at the end of the evening, I noticed that my friend had actually gotten quite intoxicated. And in fact, the staff at the restaurant had come over because she and another physician had really indulged quite a bit. And they were concerned because where I am in Canada, there's laws now around establishments like bars and restaurants in terms of not serving somebody if they see that they're clearly intoxicated and could present harm to themselves or others. And so the staff came over and they said, well, we're a little bit concerned. We know this is your coworker. We know these are your clients. What would you like us to do? because, we obviously can't serve them anymore.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, what had happened was with my other colleague, we were trying to figure out what to do, and both of them ended up leaving in one vehicle. And it was just kind of shocking to me. I just didn't know what to do. I had not come across this before. And what ended up happening was I discovered the story afterwards was that, yes, she had left with this physician. I'm not sure what happened that evening. She was married. And I think that was just the start for me of Jessica, of then reflecting back on some other incidences that had happened where I noticed that she had consumed a lot of alcohol and seemed to actually be fairly intoxicated. Like it just sort of started to trigger for me some things of like, I wonder what's going on. And unfortunately, that particular episode, Jessica, some of the other physicians that were there were concerned, and it got
Mhm.
reported to my manager. And that was actually the turning point of when she actually sought professional help. Um,
Wow.
so at that point, she was advised by our employer that she needed to actually seek professional help and that she would need treatment. So she did actually go to a treatment facility. Um, one of the things that I would share is that what I thought was unfortunate, Jessica, in the situation was the gossip that ensued, right? I think again, right, it's the stigma, it's the people wanting to gossip about it and making things up about this individual. When I I realized it is a disease, and she actually had a family history of her father having been an alcoholic in a similar in the same industry. So there's also that aspect of I know possibly that being genetic or hereditary, or certainly having been exposed to it as a family member, how that can influence somebody as well. So during the time that she was in treatment, it was meant to be kept confidential at work. I was actually one of the very few people that knew, but it got disclosed to other people, and I was actually really disappointed and upset that that had happened.
Sure.
She subsequently left the organization. She was unfortunately, I don't recall now whether she chose to leave or she was exited, but she left the organization. And a couple of us, as friends, as very close friends with her, were supporting her. And one of the very unfortunate things that happened, Jessica, was that she lost custody of her daughter. Her husband
Mm.
actually filed for separation and filed for custody of her daughter. Her daughter was, I think, about 8 or 9 at the time. She was living, alone in an apartment, trying to make ends meet with a cleaning job. She did at one point try to take her own life by overdosing on medication. But I think it was more just a cry for help than it was truly wanting to end, so to speak.
Mhm.
But another mutual friend of ours actually took her in for a period of time to just give her a place to sort of land and support her while she was getting back on her feet. And I think the thing that I learned from that, Jessica, is how important it is to really just be there as a support, not to judge, to educate ourselves on learning more about alcoholism and addiction, to understand and to really appreciate the kinds of issues that they might be struggling with. I think for her, the thing that I did the most, Jessica, was just to listen, to just be there, to truly make myself available, to say, if you do need to reach out, please reach out. And she did also share some concerns with her children. She eventually got custody of her daughter back, but it was a
Mhm.
number of years. And of course, by the time that happened, her daughter was moving into the tween years, right, which is a sort of a very challenging time of life for parents and
Sure.
the kids going through it. And one of the biggest concerns that her daughter had, and her daughter's a very bright young woman, is she said, could I possibly go down the same road? Right.
Mm.
It also Her alcoholism also caused her to be separated from her oldest son, who she has not had contact with for many, many years now. She did have to do work to repair her relationship with her middle son as well. So I see somebody who has really fought to come back from something and to really battle the stigma, the judgment, the shame, um, and also be willing to admit her mistakes. That was something she said she spent a lot of time with her kids talking about was just owning her mistakes. And I know that that's also part of the process through AA. She's been, I think, about 15 years sober now. Um,
Wow.
yeah, and one of the things I
You,
think post her recovery, Jessica, that I'm very mindful of is in social events, just kind of checking in on her to say, are you okay with being at this event? Because it's, there's probably going to be, a lot of alcohol served, right? Or there's going to be bar service. Or if we go for dinner, I specifically bring alcohol-free wine.
Mhm.
And we all drink it, right? Because I'm perfectly
Right.
fine with doing that.
Yeah, you've touched on so many good points. So if you, we can just pause here for a second and just touch on a couple of them. So first of all, like I think from the very beginning, when you said we had talked pre-recording about how women have the ability to two things: one, hide it, because of the stigma, and two, like it takes them so. A lot of women are affected differently. So I know someone who started drinking when they were like in their 40s, and by the time they were 45, it was just a mess, so it affects women differently. And you talked a lot about, and that's true, like we can present and we're high functioning and we get up and we go to work. I talk about a lot how, an act of alcoholism, you get up and you head to work when you should probably be heading to like the hospital, and the other thing is that it being a disease, I know for myself, I didn't understand that. Like I didn't understand that. It was my mom that said to me, she said, if you had cancer, we would all be surrounding your bedside. This is no different. This is a disease. You're going to take care of it, and then you're going to get better and you're going to move on. And that really helped me. And she was also, like you had mentioned, the one that in my early years, I would be at like a long dinner table, but she would always order exactly what I ordered. You get like a Perrier, or you get a Coke or something, and she would have exactly what I had. And I knew that. So she was like just such a solid ground for me, and it's
Mm.
just so important to have people who aren't judging, who are accepting, and who are trying to understand what you're going through to see you back to your normal self. So,
Yeah. And I think that piece, um, Jessica, around the fact that women do tend to present as more high functioning is a really important piece, especially now in a world that is so chaotic. A world, right, where people wear that badge of busyness, right? Like, I'm so busy, I don't have time to, right? Like, have coffee with you,
yes.
right? Or like, and I think that just adds an extra layer of pressure, right, to people and and how they deal with that. And so I think also just being much more accepting and normalizing the importance of mental health as much as physical health. And I think to your piece, as you said, around, if it was cancer, right, we would all be rallying because, there's all this, so much around cancer. But I think that was also a really important point in her recovery, is
Mhm.
to know that she had people behind her that supported her, right? And yes, even if I didn't understand it, not to judge it, right? Because I have no idea what it would be like to be in that world, right? To, as you said, right, to get up in the morning and, yeah, have a drink and go to work, right? And put on your face,
Right.
right? So we've just got to really be there to just um, have their back, right? And have them know that we will be there no matter what.
Yeah. And also when you made the point that she almost came to the point of not wanting to be here anymore. And so you take a relatively highly functioning individual, pair it with the disease of alcoholism, and the struggle to live in that becomes so difficult that that looks like a good option.
Mhm.
And that is time and time again, I've heard people and I've experienced that myself. And it's mind-blowing in retrospect, but so very true. And that kind of speaks to the difficulty of this disease and how it can really take someone out, not only of their day-to-day life, out of their children's life, but out of life itself. And so the seriousness of it is there. And my heart goes out to any woman, mom, who has their children taken as a result of, because I've seen that time and again. And I had one particular friend who the same thing happened, and the support was so big. I remember sitting in court the day that that happened, and she had asked a couple of people to show up, and I think there was 15 women there to support her regaining custody of her son because she had been in a better place for so long that and they did award her that day, but it didn't come easy. That's really a matter of your heart. That's one of the heartbreaking realities of addiction.
And I think the other thing that I would add to that, Jessica, is that, the story does have a positive ending.
Yes.
She divorced her husband at that time, found somebody else that she's been married to for over 10 years now. I was actually her maid of honor. She's repaired the relationship with her daughter and her son. Um, and I think sometimes too, Jessica, when somebody goes through something like this, they worry about the impact on their children, right? Particularly when they talk about a hereditary or genetic component to it.
Yes.
But she's had very, very open conversations with her daughter around that, right? If you,
Mhm.
particularly when she's going to university, if you, we don't know a lot about, like whether you'll be affected the same way as me. It's up to you the choices you want to make, but come to me, talk to me, ask me any questions. So she's always been a very open book. And I think that has really helped because both of her children that she does have relationships with are very successful. Her daughter's an accountant, her son is an electrician, right? And he started
Right.
his own family. So there's a really great happy ending to that story. But yes, to your point, it can take some time, as it did for her, to actually regain custody of her daughter
Sure.
over time.
Let's take a moment to hear a recovery story from one of my sponsors. At the age of 25, recently married and a new father, Jack found himself in a Texas rehab facility detoxing. After 10 years of addiction, he was finally able to admit that it was time to get help. Not only did SoberLink allow him to be accountable and track his sobriety, SoberLink allowed Jack to prove to himself and others that he could make the change he had always hoped for. SoberLink is the portable sobriety tracker taking the recovery world by storm. It has built-in facial recognition, sensors that detect cheating, and instant results sent to contacts. It's the number one accountability tool for keeping yourself honest and rebuilding trust. Visit www.soberlink.com/sober-living and check out the show notes to click the link and receive $50 off your device today. Now back to our guest. I agree with you too. That is the story of being in the disease, but once out of it, the promises of restoration of your family, reconciliation with friendships, regaining yourself professionally, all of those, just as high, we were talking about high functioning. And, that high functioning alcoholic, once the alcohol is removed, they are just a complete success story, and to the point of the kids, I think that experience, yeah, it's that genetic component, you never know, right? So those conversations, you're able to be a little bit more candid, having lived through it yourself, and you're able to give your kids an edge on, because like the world is, just covered in alcohol, drugs, I don't know, vaping, whatever anybody's doing in the middle school, high school level, that kind of kicks off, what their trajectory is going to be. And to have that wisdom before they walk in the door or walk in that classroom to know is so important.
Mhm. Well, it was interesting too, Jessica, because we would often have conversations around what it was like for her to be at events sober.
Mm.
Um, and how, she said it was a very different experience. My husband and I actually don't drink very much by choice. That's just who we are. And it is interesting, right? It's just like, okay, the conversations that you're having, the behaviors that you're noticing, right? But it's challenging, right? And I know that there's more awareness and more encouragement of people to live a consciously sober life. But you're right, because it's those kinds of vices and activities are often associated with what we see as being fun, right? It's like, and really, what is the
Such a
term
good point.
social? And really, what does the term social drinker mean? Like, you either drink or you don't, right? It's like there's
Right.
nothing social about it, right? It's almost like if you're social, you're okay. But it's just like if you went past that point, you become an alcoholic. And it's like, well, actually, social drinkers probably have an alcohol problem, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. You can really get back into the world, once you have a really strong foundation and you do have the support of friends like yourself and then also family who is, and I think that really comes after that internal decision is made from the alcoholic or the addict that they don't want to do this anymore and they're committed to wellness, and once they respect, I know once I respected my own sobriety, I knew that I would never have to explain it to anyone else again. It just,
Mm.
I knew that I had crossed over into a life that I wanted to live, and I was willing to do anything to stay there. And that really changed my relation. They always say, if you've ever heard this saying, the people closest to us are the last ones to see us change, right? And so it's a walk, but it's one worth taking, right? Because you can live in this world today sober. The stigma's still there for sure. But just like with anything else that holds a stigma, it takes years. And I think presently, I feel like it's a lot more accepted. There's a lot more non alcoholic, whatever coming up. And it doesn't, once you arrest alcoholism, it doesn't have to become your entire life to be like sobriety, like a sober person. Like you get access to all the other parts of your life that you were cutting out when you were drinking. So your
Mm.
life really gets big, whereas in active addiction, it's small. And so there's that component too. It's really a positive to a sober life if you're
Mhm.
truly afflicted with alcoholism.
I really love that metaphor, Jessica, of how you actually get bigger rather than smaller. It's like
Yeah.
widening the aperture when you're actually in a place where you can actually have clarity, and really be present. And the other thing that you touched on that I just wanted to mention was that as part of her journey, she did embrace working with a therapist. And I did have the opportunity to work with her as a coach. So I think that's the other thing that I would share with people is that um, asking for help, right? And we hear it a lot, but asking for help is a sign of strength, not weakness, right? Because it takes courage and strength to say, I have an issue that needs support or help or
Mm-hmm.
assistance, right, of some sort. And so I think for her, that was also a really important part of her journey, of which, I applaud her for, because
Sure.
it takes a village.
Yeah, sure, sure. So, what are some of the things that when you were talking before we started, you had said you had noticed some signs. We'll go here first before we go to the solution part of it. that we hide it, right? So people hide it. And so what are some of the signs? Like, I could think back of like when we would be at a family event and everybody else would drink while they were there. But then as they were walking out, the drink would be over and they would be saying their goodbyes. And I remember always having something still in my hand. And I'm like,
Mm.
wow, in retrospect, telltale sign, like if you can't put it down or remove yourself from it, like that, it was just different. It was different than what everybody else was doing. Did you see any telltale signs in
That's a
addition to what you've already spoken about?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a good question. So during the time that we worked together, one of the things that would happen is if we were on at meetings, we would actually have, of course, our business meeting, but we would also have social events. And I think if I were to reflect back, um, there's, I didn't really pay attention to it, but as I reflect back, there seemed to be quite a bit of consumption of alcohol, right? It wasn't just the one or two, right, drinks. There seemed to be a lot. Um, and she would often, on occasion, she would get into very sort of depressive moods, right? Because I think, again, I know from my days in university when, everybody
Mm-hmm.
drank and they would party, like you would get some people who would get very depressed, right? Some people who just talked a lot, right? She was one of these people who would get quite depressed. And so as I think about that, Jessica, which is not really like her. She's a very practical, no nonsense person. It's not to say that she isn't emotional or caring, but she just wasn't those people that was that emotive. But it happened when she would drink, right? And then I do recall now references to things growing up that were hard. She had she loved her dad and she had a very close relationship with her dad, but she would also allude to just family issues that existed, right? So again, I think to me, as I reflect back, those might be some of the sort of telltale signs. And then certainly that episode that became the turning point was a real sort of eye opener, I think, of like some very dramatic behavior that I had not ever seen before.
Right, right. Yeah, you mentioned, family and upbringing and to, like alcohol, I think for so many people is like a coping mechanism. And so when you put it down, I think you're saying about a therapist, whatever their road to recovery is, whether they use a 12 step or however they come to build a foundation. I think added therapy is so key. Like it's such an addition to understanding yourself, bringing to light those things that may have been hard, like talking about those struggles so that it becomes less and you don't have all this to cope with because your coping mechanism as you once knew it is now gone. And to then get some tools on how to better cope because life doesn't stop in sobriety. We have losses, we have sicknesses, job changes, moves, difficulties that you have to navigate sober. And so if you reach out early, and I think, asking for help, a lot of times the inability to ask for help just delays recovery for years, and so self-sufficient people like suffer for that because they're like, I can do this. Why can't I, why is this failing? Why, for me, how can I not solve this, and it just that drive to just figure it out just takes years away from, truly getting help. And finally, you're just like, I need help. Like, I really need help. And that's when things started to change. I know for me.
Well, and I think you make a really good point, Jessica, which is what are the things that we can do to sustain that, right? What sort of, because right, the temptation doesn't go away, right? Because unfortunately you can't, you hope that the people around you will be supportive. Like I said, I am very mindful to bring a de-alcoholized wine, which I know she enjoys when we go for dinner to their house. But, unfortunately, people can't remove themselves from alcohol completely in the environment. And so it is about what sort of as you said, tools and skills, and even for all of us, right? Because again, right, the world continues to be more challenging.
Hmm.
We're all being hit with different traumas all the time, right?
Hmm.
You and I talked about the fact that we care for parents, right? That in it of
Yes.
itself creates pressure, right? Just our life circumstances. So I love what you said. And one of the things that I've educated myself on is resilience, because I see that is
Yes.
something that really, even just clients who are not struggling with an addiction, um, but maybe work workaholics is a form of addiction, right? Because
Sure.
they are constantly checking their phone, right? They are on email on the weekends, right? They're working late at night, right? And so it's the to your point, how do we build resilience, right? And how do we learn the tools that will help us in those
Mhm.
moments, as you said, where that stress and that tension comes, right? Where you're looking for some way to really manage it effectively.
Right, right. Yeah. So here would be a great place to, because I know you have this personal experience with a friend who suffered from this and now is living out an incredible life without it. So you have that personal experience, but you also have a professional experience because you do coach others to find their best version of themselves and live to their full potential. So can you talk a little bit about what you offer and where people can connect with you? We'd like to add that at the end, where people can connect with you if they wanted to, because if this resonates with them, you've had this experience, then you would be the one to speak on that. So share with listeners, just from a professional um, perspective.
Absolutely. So one of the things that I would want to share with your listeners, Jessica, is to know that as we talked about the value of a therapist, and I love what you said, which is that it actually, the sooner we do it, it actually allows us to move towards recovery more quicker. And
Mm-hmm.
so coaching is really one of those things that can be very effective as a complementary approach. So therapy will help individuals resolve some of the, as you said, issues and challenges, particularly past ones that people may be
Yes.
struggling with. And coaching is really very much a forward focused modality, right? So now that we've got you working on these issues, if I take my friend's example, with your dad and his addiction, let's talk about where you want to go with your life now that you've got a way forward. So I would work with individuals to help them identify their values. Are they living in alignment with their values? If they're not, what can I do to help them with that? And what I love about coaching is it's all about empowering the individual to make choices that align with who they are, and connect to what they value. And it is less about them not being capable, but the fact that they are capable. And that really, as a coach, I work alongside them to really identify what's most important to them. And I think to what we've been talking about, Jessica, the first step to anything is recognizing and acknowledging I have an issue, right? I have a disease. I have this behavior, right? I have these habits,
Mhm.
right? That awareness and the acknowledgement and the ownership of them, but also the desire and the commitment to making changes that will create much more positive movement in their life. Um, so I do that through coaching sessions, but I also um, bring a lot of different tools, assessments, and I also draw from so many bodies of knowledge. I mentioned to you in the our email correspondence that I'm working training in a program where it's coaching with a trauma informed a lens, and I think that's actually really important, Jessica, because particularly for people in addiction, often, not all, but often many of them have suffered some type of trauma, right? When you speak about the coping mechanism,
Mhm.
right? And that's what's happened to many addicts, right? They're trying to make the pain that they're suffering go away because they don't know how to do it. Right?
Right.
And so being able to understand that as a coach and to support people with an approach that will help them, I I believe is really important. So I'm bringing that to my practice. And I'm also very much about creating personal leadership. We are all leaders, and you decided to take charge of your life, right? You decided to make some decisions and move it in a different direction, as did my friend. And that's about courage and leadership. So that's a big part of what I do as well. I do have a newsletter that I put out weekly, so would would love for people to subscribe if they'd like to. I cover a whole range of topics just related to life and leadership, and anything that's out there that I just want to share with people. I'm also on Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn, so people can reach out to me that way. And I also shared a link with you as well, Jessica, because I think one of the most important things that we can do when we're supporting people is to actually just be to listen. And often that's what people need a lot of, is just to just know that they've been heard, because listening is something that can do so much.
Yes, I agree with you 100%. This has been such an insightful conversation. I love how you differentiated between a therapist and a coach, where a therapist is generally looking at the past and a coach is actually focusing on the present and moving you forward. So you've brought so much. I encourage listeners to head over to the show notes to pick out your free resource with listening. Like, it's such a good tool that is so, like, we think, oh, wow, we're waiting to talk, right? And so when we listen, we really gain a lot of valuable information about who's talking and how we can better serve them. So thank you so much for sharing your personal story with us today. I really enjoyed having you on.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here, Jessica, and share that with your listeners. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for tuning into the Sober Living Stories podcast. If you have been inspired, consider subscribing and sharing with anyone who could use hope in their lives. Remember to stay tuned for more inspiring stories in the episodes to come. To view our featured author of the month or to become a guest yourself, visit www.jessicastepanovic.com.